Hello, Internet. This is Brenton Lengel. This is going to be like the second in a series of vlogs that I started to going through to, I guess, explain and deal with a lot of the major writing mistakes that Game of Thrones has made in the most recent season, season 8. If you didn't catch my previous one on what went wrong with the Battle of Winterfell, I'm going to add the link in the description once this is over. Uh, you know, just again, how we're doing this. This is unscripted. I do have an idea of what I want to talk about, but I'm not going to just be things fairly together and fairly fact-based. And I want to stay away from overly opinionated things. So I'm really going to be talking about this from a standard, like professional writer standpoint, as opposed to a fan who just happened to not like something. So, whether you like the episode or whether you dislike the episode, I just more or less want to give you guys some tools of what I've picked up in my 10 years as a pro writer. And, hopefully didn't like the episode can understand more of the reasons why. And those of you who did like the episode, there's definitely some valuable takeaway just in understanding a more nuanced critique of why the episode did not work. This is not going to be as long as my previous vlog, I don't think, because all in all, I didn't see a lot of big writing problems with this episode, but there are a couple things that I really want to get into. I am, of course, talking about The Last of the Starks. This is Game of Thrones Season 8, Episode 4. Spoilers for that. And I suppose spoilers for Gilmore Girls, if you haven't seen it. It's like a 15-year-old show, or maybe, maybe much longer than that. So I kind of feel like I don't think the spoiler warning is necessary, but just in case you're someone who's like, oh, I really wanted to see Gilmore Girls, I've never seen an episode. Let me get back to this. Go watch it, come back, and then see the video. All right, so starting off, Game of Thrones, episode 4, season 8, Last of the Starks. Why am I comparing this to Gilmore Girls? Now, first off, you might think that I'm comparing it because I don't like Gilmore Girls and I'm just trying to, compare it to something like a girly TV show. That's not what I'm doing. I actually really like Gilmore Girls. I think it's a very well-written show. I've also watched a lot of Amy Sherman-Palladino's other work. Particularly, one of the ones that I've been watching recently is The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, which, again, is a good show. I have issues with it, like I have with just about every show that I see. But, she is a talented writer. She knows what she's doing, and her dialogue is absolutely phenomenal. One of the things that I love about Gilmore Girls episodes, a great little anecdote about it is that, normally a script factors out to be about 1 minute per page, and the pages in like a half-hour comedy script tend to be very, very short because they have to make room for commercials. And it's when you are actually writing a TV show, there's so much that you have to put into it that it's very difficult to cram everything that you can into a half an hour or an hour or even an hour and a half, especially when you have like a big story with a lot of characters you want to do. And the anecdote is that the actors would get the scripts for Gilmore Girls and they'd be like this thick, whereas like a TV script for like especially like a half-hour comedy is like this thick, and maybe this much for like an hour drama, but like it's like up here. And it's because of how much dialogue she works in and how snappy it is. And all in all, I felt like Gilmore Girls was definitely a good show. I've watched every single episode with my wife. She's the one that turned me on to it. And, I've really got to say that there is a lot that you can learn as a writer from a show like that. However, the comparison that I'm doing here with Game of Thrones is not particularly flattering, and there's a particular reason why. Now, for those of you who are wondering who I am and like what gives me the right to talk about this, my degree is in theater. I have worked as a playwright in New York for the past 10 years. I've had 7 of my plays brought onto the New York stage, and my comic Snow White Zombie Apocalypse is going to be released later on this year in October. And it was just a bit of it was actually just released for Free Comic Book Day. And among other things, we got mentioned by NPR, which is really exciting. So, like, I am a writer. I do know what I'm talking about to a certain extent. I'm not the best writer in the world. And, this, at the end of the day, this is just my opinion. We're dealing with art, and art is always, about taste. Never apologize for liking what you like. It is very good to like something, even if it's something that I or somebody else doesn't. And you never have to put forth a defense for, liking a show. You don't have to. Like, you just like it, that's fine. So about this episode, there's a lot that really kind of drove me crazy about it, but I really don't want to spend too much time on like plot holes. I may mention them just because I got really annoyed with them. What I want to focus on is how the problems that you saw Gilmore Girls have, especially like in the mid to later seasons, went on to cause the same problem in Game of Thrones. So what am I talking about? Okay, so Gilmore Girls, if you've ever watched the show, the thing about it is that it's kind of low stakes, which is not to say that there's not a lot of drama in it, but it's very like interpersonal, slice of life. And the reason people watch Gilmore Girls is not to see like, huge. This isn't like 24. There's not an episode where Rory has to, where she's got to like defuse a bomb by torturing a terrorist. This is a show about like 2 women, the mother and the daughter, growing up in Connecticut, and like the families in the town that surrounds them. And that's a great premise for a show. However, especially when you have like a long running series like Gilmore Girls, you run into this big problem oftentimes where the show that you are writing, if you solve too many problems for the characters, if things become too good for them, what then happens is that you have to invent drama. You have to cause problems as a writer. And part of, being a writer is coming up with challenges and problems for your characters and throwing them at them and seeing how they're going to deal with it. But the thing is that when you are creating a plot, what's very important is that the plot itself does not drive the story. There are stories that are more plot driven than character driven. It's a style, but overall, you really want to have your story in the point where, like, some writers, when they first start doing it, they'll talk about like their characters taking over the story and telling them what should actually happen and what should be written. I think this is a little bit of a exaggeration. Literally, the characters are not talking to me off the page. But when you understand the characters and when you get inside their heads and you engage in empathy for each individual perspective that you're bringing to the table, you're going to find that the characters will take you in unexpected directions. And the best kind of plot is the kind that grows organically out of the character traits. Characters have specific goals. It can be anything from saving the world to just getting a glass of water in a particular scene. And all of those scenes can have like a high amount of drama. A great example actually would be Inglourious Bastards, which has that wonderful scene like right at the beginning with the Nazi interviewing like the French farmer, and then you go down and it's the Jewish family hiding under the boards. So that's a really, really interesting scene that until the very end doesn't really have a lot of high stakes on it. And even at the beginning, you don't notice the stakes until they are revealed to you in a very kind of Hitchcockian manner. So how does this apply to Game of Thrones, and how does it apply to Gilmore Girls? Well, if you look in the like later seasons, mid to late seasons of Gilmore Girls, they will start doing things with characters that make no sense. Like from the character's perspective, if you are in there, if you're in their heads, they are not going to do what they wind up doing, and it gets very frustrating as an audience member. I think like the example of this on Gilmore Girls is like when Rory leaves Dean for Luke's nephew. I can't remember his name as Jason or something. Probably I'm wrong with that. Somebody can correct me. And what winds up happening is that she runs out on her boyfriend, who she has known for a long time. They have a very great rapport. They have similar interests, to run off with like Jesse. And Jesse, or whatever his name is, he is kind of like a bad boy and stuff. And I'm not saying that that doesn't ever happen, but that the way it was done was not particularly motivated on Rory's part. Now they could have done that by showing that Jesse and Rory actually had a lot in common, and also by building problems and personality conflicts between Rory and Dean. But they didn't do that. Instead, they just kind of went with it, and they had Rory and Dean have like one kind of superficial fight, and then he's off the show for quite some time, and she's dating this other character who doesn't really fit with her. And they did this time and time and time again with Rory, and it usually revolved around a boyfriend, but they would also do it with Lorelai. Essentially what happens is that you need a writer needs drama, a story needs drama. So if you're working on a show, if you're working like with a deadline in mind, sometimes it is very tempting to, since you're the writer, you control the whole world, you can do anything you want. If you have a cool idea that you think later on down the line needs to happen, you can just sort of strong arm your character into doing that. And like, especially if it's like an idea that maybe you've had for a while. But I'm going to tell you, if you are writing a story, really you want to avoid that. I would honestly, they talk about like in an argument, straw manning and steel manning. And a straw man argument is when you misrepresent your opponent's argument in order to make it an easier argument so that you can more easily win and give the impression that you have won because you have defeated the false argument. The steel man is, kind of going through the principle of charity. You try to find your opponent's argument and place it in the strongest possible light, and then you argue with it. And that's really what you want to be doing when you are writing characters and you want them to make mistakes. You want to get your characters into a position where, knowing who they are, the audience knows what the choice they're going to make, and they know that it's the wrong choice very often. It's not that events conspire to force them this way or that. It's not that they suddenly start acting irrationally. It's that what they are doing makes sense based upon who they are and what they have been forced with in their own limited perspective. So really, like, when Daenerys makes a mistake in Game of Thrones, or Jon Snow makes a mistake, if we're doing it right, the audience needs to be sitting there like, oh no, don't do that. I know what you're going to do, Jon Snow, and stay away from that. Oh, he did it. And we saw a lot of this with kind of Robb Stark, with Ned Stark. Their faults were at the time, like if you were in their heads, even if you wouldn't make the same decision as them, you knew that you were them, there was a high likelihood of you making that same decision with the information that they have available. Ned Stark was always going to tell Cersei that she was going to be found out and give her time to flee, because that's the honorable thing to do, and that was Ned's like primary characteristic. Robb Stark, being a takeoff from his father, is absolutely going to follow his heart, because that's the kind of family dynamic he's used to. Even though it was an arranged marriage between Catelyn, there was genuine affection there. And also because he feels the same kind of draw of honor by following his father's example. He will hurt himself and put his own goals in jeopardy in order to pursue what he sees as personal. I guess the phrase would be like a certain amount of like personal moral significance. So the way this all ties back is that when Robb Stark makes the mistake of marrying Charlie Chaplin's daughter, um, and when Ned Stark makes the mistake of telling Cersei, these are things that naturally outgrew from their characters. When Daenerys Targaryen makes the mistake of going up against Jon Snow and telling Jon Snow, like, you've got to hide who you are. No one can ever know about this. We can't be ruling. I can't be ruling and having my husband be someone with a stronger claim to the throne. I'm sorry, that just, it doesn't work. Like, everything that we know about Daenerys, she's not, she's pretty hot-headed. And she does want that throne like a lot more than is healthy. But the level to which she causes problems for herself in this scene and the level to which the Starks react to it, I don't buy any of it. I don't buy, Sansa's reaction to Daenerys. I don't buy the Starks sitting there and like conspiring against Daenerys together because they're the last of the Starks, supposedly. And I really feel like this tension it was brought by writers who have an idea in their head of where they want the story to go, and darn it, they're going to make those characters fit, regardless of whether it's a square peg in a round hole or not. Similar stuff happens with this, honestly, with Brienne and Jaime. And the actor that plays Jaime specifically said that he does think that Brienne and Jaime are in love, but in this world they would never get together. And I 1000% agree with that. Again, it's this Gilmore Girls idea of forcing the drama on the characters rather than organically growing it out of them. And I actually feel like Brienne's sleeping with Jane, like, this actually got to me because I loved, and this is once again more personal stuff, but I actually really loved Tormund Giantsbane's reaction to Brienne. And I really think they should have gotten together, and Jaime and her should have remained like very close friends who are in love but are never going to get together for a number of reasons. One, I think that Jaime's relationship with Brienne is the inverse of his relationship with Cersei, and his relationship with Cersei was heavily sexual. So I feel like his relationship with Brienne should be on the more chaste side. Secondly, Jaime doesn't really care about Brienne in that way. Like, I don't see Jaime going in for casual sex with somebody, especially not because he's like been with one woman his entire life, which is Cersei. And also, like, I just don't see him valuing Brienne like as a sexual being. Now, that's what actually makes the thing with Tormund so great. Because, you have Brienne who, because of the way she is, in the culture that she's in, kind of gets mocked for being, unwomanly, for not appearing in the way that people expect a woman to, for not having the body that people expect a woman to have, and for not having the interests that people expect a woman to have. But what's really interesting about that when you go to Tormund with the Free Folk is that Tormund is coming from a completely different cultural background with a completely different set of values, where a woman like Brienne is actually like a really serious woman that you absolutely want. And it makes sense that you would, especially, if you're living north of the wall and you don't have this highly regimented society based upon nobles and other people's perception of you. It's more important that you survive and thrive and have like a happy, safe family. I really can see why Tormund would be into Brienne because of that, because really she does exemplify a lot of wildling values, and they don't have those kind of values that they don't have the same sort of patriarchy. In fact, I don't think they have patriarchy at all, because you didn't see too much of that in how they responded to Jon Snow's first love. So, you know, again, it comes back to the strong arming of a character, to the forcing of a situation to where you're going to get the drama that you want. And I really want to say that oftentimes so much of the creative process is subconscious, and so many of like the really cool connections and the things that you come up with happen back here. They happen somewhere in your mind, that you're not entirely consciously aware of, and you can't quite know where something is going to go until you write it. And oftentimes, I think in the highly structured way that a TV show has to operate, writers kind of move away from that, and they stick with the outline that's been put together by them and the rest of the writers' room, perhaps a couple of executives. And sometimes you really have to get away from that, because you never know what's going to happen in the moment. I actually have a writing partner who gets really annoyed with me, because we'll sit down and we'll plot out a scene, and we're like, this is going to happen, now this is going to happen, and this is going to happen. Okay, go write it. And I'll sit down and write it, and the script will be like, nope, totally different direction. You know, you need that freedom as a writer to play. You need that freedom to let the characters tell you where the story is going to go. Because if you do that, you will find that the reaction that the audience gives you is far stronger, and far less, I guess, it's not cheap. Whereas, you know, if you start making drama between John and Danny, and you start forcing Danny into this role of the Mad Queen just because it says on your outline that she should be the Mad Queen, you know, you're really going to run into trouble. And in fact, that actually gets down to another part of the episode, like towards the end, after the dragon had been killed. And, you know, for the record, oh Lord, that was dumb. Okay, so first off, like, and this is me, this is the thing that I told you I wasn't going to do, but I just have to get this out there. I don't buy for a second that Euron has the capability of sneaking up on Danny and on those dragons. That absolutely not. Not if they're like behind a cove or anything. Not on a clear day. I know, like in the books, Euron is really sneaky and his ship is very quiet, and all the men on the ship have their tongues cut out. But that's because he's like a ghost pirate and he's got some magic powers. You know, the Euron in the show is like a bad frat boy's impression of the Joker, like crossed with a little bit of Jack Sparrow. He's a terrible character and an awful casting. Like the actor doesn't even look like he belongs with the Ironborn. The actor really looks like he should have been playing, you know, somebody with the Boltons or the Starks. He looks more like a Northerner than, you know, what they established for the aesthetic. And also, like, how do you screw up Euron that bad? Like, it's a ghost pirate. He's basically Cervantes from, you know, from Soul Calibur. Creepy, like he's not undead, but, you know, he should have like kind of the image of somebody who has kind of walked between worlds, who has access to magic that you can't imagine. It's just a very, very bad choice. And like the only thing I can think of is like maybe that actor's like somebody's cousin or something, and they're like, oh, you've got to get him in here and see his screen test, and they went with it like because of personal relationships. That's the only thing that makes sense for why they would take a character that was written as horrifyingly as Euron and reduce him to that, and then God mode him the way that they are. So I don't believe he can sneak up on the dragons. I also don't buy for a second that the ballista can be that effective. And like, there's no, other people have done videos about this. A ballista is not going to be able to hit the ships in the way and do the kind of damage that they did in the show. Like even cannons can't do that. So, you know, that, again, this is opinion. I think that's a bad choice. I think it's unrealistic, but it's not necessarily a writing problem, but I wanted to get that out of the way. Now, let's talk about Danny getting kind of strong-armed into being the Mad Queen. And this kind of goes back to, they've been hinting at it for a really, really long time. And the way that they've been hinting at it is by having a characters come up to her and go, "Wow, Danny, you don't want to be like your father. It sounds like this thing you want to do is a lot like your father. Don't do it." And then Danny is like, "I'm not my father, and I'm going to do it." And then she goes off and does it a lot of the time, and like in Yunkai, and it works for her. It works really, really well. And a lot of the time, the story will reward Danny for following through with like some of her more brutal ideas. Dracarys, burn the opposition, and I actually love that about her. And if you really want to set Danny up for a fall, you have to put her in a position where um, raw power cannot solve the problem. A great example, I use the Dark Knight as an example, but you've got the Joker on the table uh, in the jail, laughing at Batman, saying, "You have absolutely nothing you can do to me, nothing that you can do with all of your strength." And it was true. No matter how much Batman beat him up, he had he had taken the physical component out because of the type of character he was. And really, that's what you want to do when you want to overwhelm a physical powerhouse. You have to take them out of their element. So if you really want to put Danny in a pressure cooker and maybe even have her fail, that's the key to doing it. Give her a problem that cannot be solved with force alone, and watch her either surmount that problem or watch her fail and buckle and fall back on what she has always done. Um, that's not what they're doing, though. And a great example is, when she gets to Westeros, I remember the episode where Bronn tried to kill, and Bronn and Danny both tried to kill Drogon, and they both failed, wonderfully, which was great. And that genuinely had me on the edge of my seat because I knew they were going to start killing these dragons eventually. But at the end of the episode, Danny goes in and she's got all the soldiers captured. And she's like, "Okay, you have a choice. You can either go into bondage, or bend the knee and work for me. But if you're defying me, I'm going to burn you." To some extent. I haven't rewatched that episode. And you see like the Tarleys respond, particularly like Randall Tarley is like, "No, you're a foreigner. I'm not going to bend the knee to you no matter what." And Danny's like, "Okay." And she burns him, and she burns Dickon because Dickon stands with his father, like an idiot. And this right here is a really big problem because everybody was like, "Oh, Danny shouldn't have done that." And even Tyrion was like, "Oh, you shouldn't have done that. You should have spared them." Tyrion, that in and of itself is Gilmore Girls and Tyrion, because Tyrion knows enough about leadership to know that if you are in a position of leadership and you make a threat, you absolutely cannot not follow through on that threat when your authority is challenged. That is why if you ever find yourself, like as a coach or as a manager or as a parent, if you can't control your anger and can't keep yourself from threatening something that you can't follow through on or won't follow through on, whenever you don't follow through on that, that is going to undermine you, and people will not believe you the very next time. There's a lot of subtleties of leadership that the series just does not seem to get. This is jumping topic a little bit here, but like even back to what's his name? It's like a Star Wars name. The head of the Wildling army, the king beyond the wall. He's having that conversation with Jon, and this is when Stannis has told him to bend the knee, and he says like, "I can't bend the knee. We don't kneel." And Jon kind of frames this as a thing about his pride, and he won't kneel because of his pride. And he doesn't explain this to Jon Snow, and I think it's because the writers didn't quite understand why he wasn't kneeling in this instance. Because he doesn't really explain it to Jon Snow. It is obvious why he doesn't kneel there. The reason he doesn't kneel is he spent his entire life building the greatest army the North has ever seen. He built that coalition. And he knew that if he bent the knee, the other wildlings would desert him. His life's work would crumble. And he would rather die than see everything that he had worked for years and years and years undone. And that is why he had to die, and why Jon giving him that mercy and killing him was what made him the natural successor. His death, his sacrifice there was what brought the wildlings together. But he never explained that to Jon. And there was no reason for him not to do it other than either the writers didn't know that that was the reason, or another possibility is that they knew that was the reason, but they worried that explaining it would make like the reveal less emotionally powerful. And when your tricks and when like you're like, oh, I got this reveal, I can't wait, the audience needs to get this information when I want them to get it, sometimes that's really, really great. I love that tactic of popping out information like breadcrumbs. But if it gets in the way of your storytelling and the logic, and it gets in the way of the values of your characters, you're in trouble. You absolutely are in trouble as a writer, because you're undermining your own work, and you need to go back and you need to do another draft or 2 or 3 until you figure that out. And if it's something that you absolutely can't tell, cut away. But don't have the actual conversation there and have this really important thing unsaid if there's no reason for it to go unsaid. So, like when Dany burned the Tarleys, a lot of my friends, even because the show was so strong on like, this is the wrong thing to do, Dany, bad Dany. A lot of my friends were like, oh, Dany's losing her mind. And I remember I like jokingly posted the hashtag like, Daenerys did nothing wrong, which is of course that thing you say when they did something wrong, but you're just like, I'm okay with this. And I really like 100%, I'm okay. If I was Dany, I'd have burned the Tarleys. Now, I might not have made the threat to burn them if I wasn't prepared to follow through with that. But again, Dany is a pretty hot-headed person and is going to make that threat. But once the threat is made, it either gets followed through with, or she undermines her position in the eyes of her men and in the eyes of her enemies. So now we've got Dany, and she's mad about Rhaegar being killed, and I'm mad about Rhaegar. I'm mad about the it's Rhaegal, I think. Yeah. The Green Dragon. I'm mad about him being killed as well. I really wanted to see Viserion resurrected, and for Jon, Dany, and Tyrion to ride the dragons in the final battle against the Night's King and save Narnia. I don't know if I would have done that exactly, but I love the whole prophecy with the dragon must have 3 heads, and I really think getting rid of the dragons is a huge, huge, huge mistake. And if you are going to get rid of the dragons, don't do it so close to the end. They need to go in the last episode or the episode before the last episode. So when they killed the Night King, or the Night's King. I said Night's King a lot before because I think that's a better name. And also I kind of conflate him with the character in the story. I assume that George R.R. Martin had a similar plan for that figure, and he would be revealed to be the person behind the White Walkers. So when you have, sorry, train of thought crashed. What I was saying was that when you got rid of the White Walker threat, and you just had Cersei, suddenly the stakes go, ooh, and they really disappear because of where you had the story before. And if Gilmore Girls has issues, by making things a little too good between everybody's relationships and solving too many problems, Game of Thrones has issues where they haven't solved all the problems, but the problems seem insignificant. Cersei really is a threat that is completely insignificant compared to the Night's King, or the Night King, or however you want to call him, specifically because she's just a mortal woman, and she is going to die in like 20 years no matter what. 20, 30 years, 40 years tops. She's going to die, her reign will end, and somebody else will take her place, and hopefully they'll be better. So, she's a personal threat to the character. She's a threat to the people we care about, but she is not like a global level threat or a regional level threat like the White Walkers were. And so, like I said, they needed to do their best to hobble Dany and to sow dissension in the ranks, and they just didn't do it in an organic way. Um, and so as they kind of push Dany towards this whole thing of being the Mad Queen, just know that I'm going to be sitting there going, I don't buy this. I don't buy it at all. And, I really think you guys should have rethought it. So, I mean, there are my thoughts. I made the same point several times, but I really wanted to get around to it because, like, this episode was kind of a mess. And yeah, there was some weird pacing in it, and some stuff happened at strange points, and there were bad choices. But really, like, it wasn't like the previous episode where things could be chalked up to a really unfortunate, like, earth-shattering decision. That's now led to it being the second lowest rated episode on Game of Thrones. This particular episode, it was more, it was fine at times. But, it was more a factor of numerous bad choices and some fairly common writing mistakes that unfortunately are going to plague you when you're on a show like Game of Thrones and you've lost the plot. And so, you're just going and writing the story by committee and figuring out, jumping from plot point to plot point that happened to be in Martin's, outline or your own. So that's it. Like and subscribe. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will be back next week to comment on Game of Thrones. And I also have a debate with the Distributist. He's a right-wing Catholic YouTube personality, and I should be debating him potentially today, but if not today, sometime within the next week. I'm really excited about that, and I kind of want to hit some of the points that Vash, or however you say his name, I felt either missed or when they were talking past each other. All right. Thanks very much. I am Brenton Lengel, and check out my comic Snow White Zombie when it comes out in October.